if exercise was a pill, it would be the single most important drug.
One person in every 15 minutes will die from being physically inactive.
10 times more effective than anything else.
You can reduce your mortality by 15%.
Okay, welcome back. Thanks for coming on again. We are going to talk about exercise today and how hard and fast to go. So the impact of intensity and duration and how that impacts our health. So Plato said, probably not famously, but a lack of activity destroys the good condition of every human being, while movement and methodical physical exercise saves and preserves it. So we know exercise just isn't about weight loss, even though a lot of people are doing it for that reason. And it's not just about performance, it's about longevity, mental health, cardiovascular problems, disease prevention, all of that jazz. But Nick, can you go into a bit more detail as to why we would exercise?
Absolutely. There's loads of research out there on the benefits of exercise. And interestingly, if we go back to the 50s, we didn't really have the evidence to underpin it. We kind of thought exercise was beneficial, but couldn't prove it. And there's a couple of doctors in London who first spotted a correlation between exercise and health. They noticed that they were getting lots of bus drivers who are coming in to the mortuary, so lots of bus drivers dying early, and they wondered if there was a link there between that role where you're not moving around as much. And so they went out across the country, got information from all over the UK, and they showed that the bus conductors were much less likely to die young than the bus drivers. Because if you think about it, bus drivers sat there in the bus all day not moving, bus conductors going up and down the stairs.
Right.
And that was our first clue that exercise might make an impact and help save your life.
Fair enough. It's a nice one.
Yeah. It's one that I've read and I absolutely love it. It's that light bulb moment of, there is the evidence there. We know that physical activity is good for us. But for me, as a consultant, we talk a lot about, we know that strokes, one person every 5 minutes in the UK will have a stroke. But actually, one person in every 15 minutes will die from being physically inactive. And that's huge. And I think it's, educating people around the importance of, if you go from nothing, no activity, really immobile, to something, you can reduce your mortality by 15%. So
that's not a lot, is it?
It's not. What 15% is a lot, but from moving to not moving, is not a lot.
Not a lot of exercise required.
Exactly.
Yeah, nice.
And so I think it's giving people the information out there to try and live a healthy, longer life.
Yeah.
Absolutely. One of the studies I read by Kokinos et al. In 2022 in the journal JACC showed that if you go from being the least active group to low activity group, your risk of dying goes from 4 times the fittest people to 3 times the fittest people. So that's a significant drop just from doing something, like you say. And that's a bigger impact than not smoking, not having diabetes, not having chronic heart disease. So it's a huge difference just doing something.
Yeah.
And those studies show that the benefit gets better the more you do. There's no limit to the benefit of doing exercise.
I guess the thing is, though, it's hard, isn't it? Like, if you could box it up, put it in a pill, make it easy, the subscriptions, that thing, exercise would be a lot higher, whereas it requires, just an inherent amount of effort to do that thing. So I think that's why, especially in the UK, we've got quite a sedentary population. It's worse in other countries, isn't it? But I think a lot of people don't do it because it is quite hard.
But I think it's important. That's the whole thing about coming back to education, because we know, yes, we are sedentary, but people know they have to eat 3 times a day, and we all accept we have to eat 3 times a day. Whereas I think actually we need people to understand that exercise is just as important.
Yeah.
So you have to exercise regularly to keep yourself fit.
Yeah. You're right.
And I think,
And you were talking about how if you could box it up, if exercise was a pill, it would be the single most important drug ever created in the history of medicine. More effective than any drug I give people for their strokes, their heart attacks, anything like that. Probably 10 times more effective than anything else we could give people.
Yeah, nice.
It's that powerful.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to say that it's not just cardiovascular exercise. Sometimes people think it's just about running, but muscle strength is important too.
Yeah.
When you think about your muscles, they're living organs that function, they absorb glucose, they're doing things, and it has a huge impact on your overall health.
Yeah.
And again, lots of studies, Garcia Hermoso in 2018 showed that it significantly reduces mortality. And there's another study by Esteban Cornejo in 2022 showing it reduced mortality, but also dementia. So by exercising, you're actually fighting dementia as well, protecting your health.
And I think, because we are all like the converted, we know how important exercise is. But if I go back to our training when we were registrars together, I don't think we were ever taught. We're taught to take a smoking history. We're taught to ask about alcohol, but we were never taught to ask about physical activity
or nutrition
or
sleep,
anything. And I think medicine actually is changing, and it is beginning to accept we need to prevent people from becoming ill, and one of those big factors is exercise.
So NICE have come out and said that they want people to be doing, well, the guideline is 150 minutes to 300 minutes of moderate intensity exercise per week. Moderate intensity, there's different ways to actually look at intensity, isn't there? So an easy scale that we can use is just whether you can hold a conversation or not. So moderate intensity is if you can actually hold a conversation probably normally, so you can't quite sing out loud, but you could hold a conversation relatively easily. That is moderate intensity. It then steps into vigorous exercise if we can't actually hold that conversation anymore. If we're struggling to actually say a few words, that's then tipping over into vigorous intensity. And then NICE changes its guidelines as it halves the time that you need to do if it's vigorous. So you can do 75 instead of 150, up to 75 minutes up to 150. So instead of 150 to 300, we're dropping to 75 to 150. That's the guideline for, broadly speaking, the intensity and the duration. And there are more accurate ways of doing it with heart rate zones, which we'll come on to later. But you touched on, interestingly, the different types of exercise as well. So we've got, broadly speaking, there's 5 areas that we look at, which is flexibility, muscular endurance, muscular strength, cardiovascular, and then body composition is the final thing. But that's kind of impacted by the other 4, and obviously nutrition as well. But Helen, you've got some really nice principles around how to approach exercise. Could you talk us through those?
Yeah, so for me, I'm always about the patient-centred care, and I think it's about trying to understand why someone is wanting to exercise, because we're all going to have different reasons. So it might be somebody wanting to do a triathlon for the first time. So I break the principles of training down to 6. So the first one is specificity. I can never say that word. But I suppose, what are we training for? Are we training for a marathon, or are we training to gain muscle mass? Because your training program is going to be very different between the two. Number 2, progressive overload. And I think that's where is a common mistake. People will go, they'll go to the gym and they'll do the same routine. They'll lift the same weights. But actually, you need to increase it over a set time period.
Is that weight, or is it number of reps, or is it rest between sets, or is it volume, or is it all of the above?
So it goes back to sorting out the key reason as to why you're doing it. So if you're aiming for endurance, so a triathlon or something, you'll do higher reps of a lower weight with a reduced rest time between each session.
Nice.
But if you're trying to fill muscle hypertrophy, so if you're there trying to build muscle mass, you're going to need higher reps, lower number, and a bigger weight.
Yeah.
Right. No, I said that wrong. So it's
lower
low reps, higher weight,
we know what you meant.
And a bigger rest time between the two, probably around 2 minutes between each rep.
Nice.
So then my third one is reversibility. And I think this is true. It's that old-fashioned saying of use it or lose it. Yeah. So actually, we do need to keep doing it. And then adaptability. Because actually, if you want to aim, say we're going back to the triathlete, they want to do it and they've never done one before, your body has to adapt. It's going to have to learn the new skills in order to complete your goal at the end. And then individuality. So you're aiming it for, every person is different, you're doing it for that specific need. And the one that we think we forget a lot is about recovery time. So yes, we've talked a lot about having to do physical activity, but one of the most important sessions in your week, and I think I get this wrong, if I want to do exercise, I want to go and I want to sweat and I want to feel like I've achieved something, but it's going to be really important to do a session within your recovery zone. So it's just as important to do that than it is to lift the heavy weights.
Yeah, nice. And that's one thing about recovery as well, isn't it? Where the higher the intensity, so if you're doing more vigorous exercise, if you're jumping into the zone 4, zone 5
Yeah.
heart rate zones, your recovery time is extended.
Yes.
So if you're doing the lower intensity stuff, you don't have to recover for quite as long. You know, when we look at exercise tolerance, if you say how far can you walk, for most healthy individuals, it's like,
Yeah.
well, an unlimited distance.
Yeah.
You know, but how far can you sprint? Well, you know, it's massively reduced because you get tired very, very quickly because our heart rate obviously goes up. So I think recovery time is very closely linked to the intensity and duration of the exercise as well.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that also goes down, isn't it, to how often to sprinting, because sprinting is a learned skill, isn't it? So I'm terrible at sprinting a foot, but it goes back to being adaptable and us all wanting to learn that skill.
Nice.
Yeah.
And Helen, I think it's really interesting what you said about the specificity, knowing what you're training for. But what if I'm not training for a marathon, but I'm training to live a really long time, live a healthy life for as long as possible? Does that change the approach?
I think the key principles of what NICE say is ultimately, yes, you need to do your 150 minutes to 300 or 75, but you need the strength exercises in there as well, at least twice a week.
Yeah.
And I
Absolutely.
think for longevity, one
Yeah.
of the most important things is the strength training. And I think
Yeah.
that's what people forget.
To offset sarcopenia.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I think, I see it with the elderly population, even my mum and dad. I tell them they need to do the strength
Yeah.
training because I don't want them to fall. I want them to be able to pick up their grandkids. And so after a certain age, I feel that strength is more important than the cardiovascular.
What simple tests can we do? So if I'm at home listening now, how do I know roughly how strong I am?
Hand grip,
Okay.
I think something relatively easy that you can do at home.
Yeah, there's loads of evidence for hand grip strength and its impact on mortality. You can buy a hand grip measuring monitor for like £15, so you can instantly check your hand grip there.
Yeah, nice.
Hilariously, arm wrestle with your grandchild.
Yeah, absolutely. That's
See if you
always a
lose.
good one.
Yeah.
And
I've seen my mum use one actually where it's like, can you stand up from a chair one-legged?
Right.
So
Yes.
if you're sat down, can you...
Or with no hands.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
yeah.
make sure.
Oh,
see
sorry,
if you
it's
can
with no
just-
hands.
With
No
no
hands.
hands.
With no
to
hands,
see
of
if
course.
you can
Yeah.
stand up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other
One-legged
one-
would be
the other
pretty
one's
tricky.
getting off the floor with no hands as well.
Yeah.
I think that's a test of flexibility as much as
Yeah.
strength, isn't it? Being able to do that one. I can't do it.
Yeah. I think talking about longevity
Yeah.
as well, though, whenever I speak to patients about really looking after their exercise, it is a blend of all of those 5 areas that we talked
Yeah.
about. You know, if your body composition's super high and you've got other risk factors, I know we don't really want to go into this too much today, but if you've got like diabetes and heart problems and they're massively overweight, we don't want to just be throwing ourselves in the deep end. You know, it's about slowly up titrating them
Yeah.
and trying to get them a bit healthier, you know, ideally reducing cholesterol, making the heart risk a little bit healthier.
Yeah.
But it's like that holistic approach of we need to be working on flexibility at least a little bit per
Yeah.
week. We need to be doing muscular endurance, muscular strength, and the cardio. But I think normally what you see is like you got the gym rats who are just
Yeah.
all they're doing is strength training, lifting iron. And you got people who love just doing marathons and
Yeah.
all of that super long distance stuff. But I think there's a sweet spot somewhere where when we look at our overall activity in the week, if we can touch in all of those different areas, that's where you're getting a very, very fit individual.
Yeah.
And you're covering all of the different types of exercise as well. So you got some low impact, low intent, which is where the 10,000 steps a day
Yeah.
thing came about.
Yeah.
But then also doing your high intensity stuff. Because then that ties in with goals, I find as well. Like no matter what somebody's doing, even if they're trying to get stronger in the gym, by getting them to do some cardio and getting them to run and to sprint, they're improving the heart's ability to, like, it increases the stroke volume,
Yeah.
all of their arteries and the veins become more elastic, and you can get better oxygen delivery into the muscles. So I find even if you're just doing your strength training, if you incorporate a bit of the holistic stuff, so if you start doing some cardio, you actually find you perform a lot better.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think, and the evidence is there to support that, isn't it? When we look at longevity and we look at reduction of cardiovascular issues, etc., the evidence is there for that holistic approach and that huge reduction of mortality.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think you're right. If you're training for longevity and for general well-being, you need to have a mixed regime that's ticking all those boxes. And I quite like Peter Attia's way of looking at it, where he says, well, when you're hitting 100, what do you still want to be able to do? So do you want to be able to pick up your grandchild from the floor? Well, if you want to be able to do that when you're 100, you need to be really strong now and maintain that muscle mass. Do you want to be able to walk to the shops? Well, if you want to be able to walk to the shops when you're 100, you need to be quite cardiovascularly fit now. And I think coming to your specificity, there's huge power in just sitting down and thinking about what you want to be able to do in your last 10 years of life, and then building a regime that sets you up. Do you want to be able to have sex? Because you're not going to be able to do it if you've got no cardiovascular fitness. You're not going to be able to keep that going. You know? Well, Ed's got a solution for everything.
Oh, no, I'm all about sprint training.
Oh, yeah, I'm glad I'm the only girl here, but it's fine. Watch me blush.
But there's more to it. There's more to it than just positioning, Ed. I'm going to tell you.
Oh, God.
But
it's all right, we can edit that bit out. That's fine.
I think we need to have that at the start, middle, and end of the podcast.
Yeah.
But you're right, and what you said before, it's your body armor, isn't it? It's not just keeping you fit; it's protecting your bones. It's if you think about diabetes, you can't grow more pancreas. You can't grow that organ to fight diabetes. But muscle is one of the few organs that we can grow more of. So if you want to get your blood sugar better, you can literally grow more muscle to help you do that, which is crazy when you think about it.
Yeah, definitely.
I love that about, in fact, now there's a decent-ish segue into heart rate zones, because I want to talk about mitochondrial density very briefly.
Yeah.
Heart rate zones, 5 of them. To get your max heart rate, what we do is we take 220 minus your age. I turned 30 last Saturday, tragically. But yeah, I did, yeah. Unideal. But I think it's relatively young, isn't it? If we're living to 110, which is the goal here, I think we're all very young people, aren't we? So you take 220 minus your age, and my max heart rate should be 190. And then what we do is our zones are based off that. So zone 1 starts at 50% of that 190. Yeah. And it's 50 to 60 is zone 1, 60 to 70 is zone 2, 70 to 80, zone 3, and so on. And what we find is in zones 1, 2, and 3, they're what we call the aerobic zones. So they're the ones where it's lower impact, less impact on recovery time as well, because we're using oxygen typically we're fueling ATP, which is the energy stores through oxygen. We're getting very little anaerobic, which is the buildup of lactic acid. And during those zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, it's a lot more fat burning, and it's really, really good for overall stroke volume of the heart, and also improving the mitochondrial density in your cells. And the mitochondria are the things actually using the energy stores.
Yeah.
Sorry, Helen.
No, and I think it goes, because those zones 1, 2, and 3, and I think it goes back to that recovery time that's really interesting, is it's much slower than you think it is. Because I think it's changing, because people realise actually just training in zone 2, you're not going to be sweating loads, but actually your body is working, and it is important for it to achieve whatever aim at the end. So we go back to zone 4.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting though, isn't it? Because I had no idea about this stuff. Obviously, you know when you're exercising, you know if you're pushing yourself. But it is helpful, I find, if I'm doing a Barry's or if I'm doing like a high intensity class, I do want to know what zone I'm in, because I use it as kind of like a stick in the sand almost as well, to track how I've been in previous workouts, because sometimes I've done like 14 minutes of zone 5, which is quite a lot. And you know, the Garmin's like, you need to chill out for like 72 hours. You need to do nothing. Whereas if you're doing, well, I can literally do like hours and hours and hours of zone 2, and the Garmin's still saying, you know, you're ready to go here. So I think it is really interesting to look at the heart rate zones, because you can actually then track your workouts in a bit more detail, and obviously everyone's going to respond in slightly different ways. And it is a little bit nerdy, but I do feel as though it gives you a lot more insight into how hard you're pushing yourself.
But I think it's changed so much, hasn't it? Because imagine 10 years ago we wouldn't have been talking, like there might have been a small sector of the population talking about it, but I feel like it's becoming much more mainstream. People are happy to track, use the Whoop, use, you know, a Watt bike and work out where they are.
It's really interesting what you're saying, because it makes me think about how we've evolved. You think we spent most of human evolution not living in cities, but foraging, hunting. That involves a long time of slow, gentle exercise where you're barely out of breath, and then briefly being able to sprint and run. So it ties into what might be a good exercise regime as well.
Nice. I don't know how true this is, but somebody told me a few years ago that apparently humans are the best animal on the planet over 10k. So if we need to just plod for an unbelievable, apart from birds, I imagine. I assume this is things with legs.
Well,
'Cause we can
birds are
plod
rubbish on walking on
They
the
are, yeah.
ground.
Well, yeah. But obviously they
But I
migrate
think
from
that's
miles.
quite true, isn't it? We are the most adaptable species.
Yeah.
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 I wanted to touch on the mental health side of things as well. And Aristotle said the health of the mind depends on the health of the body. And there's a few interesting studies that came out about the impact between physical activity and the improvements in mood. And of the 9.8 million antidepressants prescribed in the UK in 2022, around 8.8 million of them were inappropriately prescribed because there's little to zero evidence for mild to moderate depressive symptoms for putting in an SSRI or an SNRI. And when we look at the difference between, so if you put an antidepressant in somebody who's got mild depression and compared it with a placebo, there is statistically there is no difference between those two outcomes. I mean, it's hard, isn't it? Because sometimes that placebo effect for some people it does have a big impact, but equally if you give them a sugar pill, it's got the same impact. When we look at physical activity, however, and we're going to come on to METs here, a MET is a metabolic equivalent task. So it's the amount of oxygen that your body's using so it's the mils of oxygen, so the milliliters of oxygen you're using per minute per kilogram of body mass, and that is what we call one MET. So if we look at even doing very small amounts of physical activity per week, so if we look at if you're doing 50 METs per week, the first 7 METs that you do reduces your risk of depression by 25%.
Amazing.
Even within the first few bits of physical activity, you're reducing risk of depression by 25%, and that was statistically significant. Much, much higher impact than antidepressants.
Brilliant.
Then after that, if we went from the 7 METs all the way up to 35, we're only getting like an additional 4% benefit. So really, the benefits in that first bit of exercise that you were touching on earlier, if we even go from nothing to a little bit, we have a huge impact, both on like cardiovascular benefits, longevity benefits, but also on mental health and mood. And I think that when you start to exercise, you are going to recover. So you're going to have to sleep better. And when you do that, typically they're going to go, I feel healthy. I've worked hard. I'm going to have a good meal. So then you start to say, okay, just on physical activity alone, we're getting a huge benefit in terms of mood. Yeah. But then we're also starting to eat better and we're going to sleep better. Yeah. So it's like
setting up cycle.
That gradual uptake of how healthy that individual is. It's super powerful.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting what you said about the minimal or zero effects of those antidepressant drugs, and I think it's one of the problems of modern medicine, isn't it? We're all crying out for a quick fix, and even as a doctor you're kind of wanting to give people the quick fix because it's hard to sit down and talk to people.
And they do have a place. It's not, we're not demonising antidepressants here. They've absolutely got a place, but it's the band of which they work is much smaller than what's currently being prescribed. And I think
and it's taking that time, isn't it? We know that actually it's going back that lifestyle medicine is the foundation to good health. And when we're with our patients, we need to be talking to them about the 6 pillars because they're going to have a much greater impact than saying, listening, I feel very low, okay, fine, here's your antidepressant, off you go. Because you need to explain on how someone can empower themselves to make those changes to feel better. Because as the doctor, I might not be the one to help you no longer feeling low, but do you know what, if I could be the doctor to give you the tools to help yourself to feel better, then I think that would be a much better thing.
Absolutely. In some ways the world would be a better place if we all had access to a free personal trainer and a free nutritionist and had to pay for our doctor. We might actually have much better health.
Or a health coach, I'd love, or a health coach would be amazing.
What would you get out of that?
Because I think it's really important to check in every now and again. Check in where I am, how am I feeling, and that question of where do I want to go? Where do I want to go, and how am I going to get there? And I think in the olden days when we had the GPs who knew the family, they in a way would know a little bit more about their patients. Because my mum was a GP, so I'm going to say this, and she was amazing because she would know everything. And I think in one way she'd probably help coach people along. And
do you think the accountability helps for a coach? You're like, I've got to see him and tell him I didn't go to the gym this week.
Exactly.
That kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's big, isn't it? I do think that push and that drive, that those check-ins, the accountability does have a massive impact on your ability to maintain a behaviour as well. I just think it's never going to be right in the culture that we have, which is realistically you've got your GP for about 6 minutes, haven't you, with all the documentation in that consultation slot factored in. You've probably got them for 6 minutes, and I do feel as though patients go in expecting like a prescription. You know, we've very much got a culture of like, oh, I'll get a tablet and it'll fix the problem.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
I think we need to change the view of it's not fixing the problem, it's a plaster on the wound. And like the wound underneath is continuing to bleed if you're not exercising, if you're not eating well. That wound gets bigger and bigger to the point where the plaster gets bigger and bigger because the wound's getting bigger. So it's a slightly different topic, but I was listening to Andrew Huberman and Peter Attia in a podcast just yesterday, and they coined a Attia's rule, which is basically don't talk to me about supplements unless you're exercising, sleeping and eating well. Don't talk to me about supplements. They're not for you. You need to be doing the basics. And you understand your biochemistry. If you've been tested and you understand your body, then we can look at supplementation.
Then go there, exactly. And the same with this. Don't talk to me about taking other drugs unless you're doing the basics first. I mean, do talk to me about it, but you know what I mean. It's not going to benefit you unless you're doing the basics first.
But I do think that's medicine's changing, because I think even in the last 5 years as a consultant we wouldn't have been talking about this. So I think it's really exciting that we are beginning to talk about it and to empower people to make the change themselves.
And it's great, but it's also so stupid in a way, isn't it?
Oh my God, it's so simple,
We've been talking about insane medicines for years and not talking about, hey, have you ever noticed that walking's good for you? It's like, come on, how have we got so wrong? We've gone down the wrong path so long. But
so practical tips, what are we doing? As takeaways, what are we doing?
Right, so I think taking your average person, even the nice guidance, I think is a bit useless. I'd say put the guidance to one side, just do more. Most people, obviously if you're an elite athlete, great, keep being an elite athlete. Most people, look at your life, look at what you have the time to do, and just do more than you're already doing. A bit more exercise, a bit more weights, and then build it up from there.
Nice. Helen?
Definitely. I've got 2. Don't underestimate the power of walking. I think you need to do it to that. And also, I've forgotten my second one. No, what was he going to say? Make sure exercise is as important as eating and sleeping. It has to become an essential part of your life.
Nice. I think for me, the impact of exercise, if I don't exercise, my mood is considerably lower. So I've got to do it. And I find the higher the intensity, the better I feel. So I think for me, it's like, especially for young men in particular, they've got a lot of energy to offload, and women obviously, but you know, we need to be a little bit safer with people in the older categories. But if you're young, I think we have got to push ourselves and really go for it.
I think it changes though over time. So I think I was like that in my 30s, but now being 40, I think I don't have that energy as much, and I've got different. The plate is different, isn't it? There's different responsibilities.
Definitely.
So it's making sure that the exercise is right for your part of your journey.
We've got more going on with kids.
Exactly.
That's the thing, and that's why I think the guidance isn't so useful. If you tell people do this many hours a day and they go, well, I've got a job, I've got kids, I need to sleep at some point, they're not going to do it. If you say just do something, just start small, actually most of the benefit is just getting off the couch. You know, the 10,000 steps, I love the story about the 10,000 steps. Do you know why we're told to do 10,000 steps?
Go on.
Because the Japanese character for 10,000 looks like a person walking. And it was a Japanese clockmaker who came up with these pedometers, and he thought, how do I sell it? Oh yeah, 10,000. Most of the benefit you get from 5,000 steps. So just do something.
Exactly. So take the lift instead of, don't take the lift, take the stairs in something simple when you're in work.
Love it.
Yeah, like absolutely.
Brilliant. Thank you guys. Cheers.
Thanks.
Cheers.
One take.